took a freight train to be my friend.
Carlos Morin is on. Carlos is an attorney. He practices primarily in Kingsville. Carlos may be more liberal than me now because people are always changing, but I agree with him on many issues. We were talking, I had a little bit of a glitch before. We were talking about the caravan coming up from what countries in Central America is a caravan of, you can call them illegals, which I prefer. Some people like to say undocumented aliens. What countries are they coming up from?
I believe Guatemala and Honduras. Honduras primarily.
Okay, I thought there were 3 countries, but Guatemala, Honduras, and they call it like a triangle.
And, I believe Salvador.
Okay. Well, I don't know that that's the most important issue. The most important issue is, are they coming up for legitimate reasons?
Yes.
Is it meant to intimidate Americans? Are our immigration laws, are we having problems? Do we need the labor? Do we have a social or moral obligation to these people? Those are the kind of issues that I wanted to discuss.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Okay, you asked me multiple questions.
Right,
so
I did.
Let me try to give you. It's going to be a little long answer, but okay.
Okay.
Number one is these people are considered political refugees, and they're here to try to get a political asylum. That's what they're classified as under international law and under our laws. I think that the classifying these people as Trump has as invaders is just really does these people an injustice, because do we have a responsibility? Yes, we do, and I'll tell you why. Because if you look at the history of American intervention in Central America, in Nicaragua, in Honduras, in Guatemala, and so on, if you look at historically, we have intervened in their political affairs. We have propped up dictatorships there. Most recently, in 2010, we had President Ayala, who was kind of a leftist center, social democrat of sorts, right? Maybe a little bit like Bernie. And he was trying to pass social policies that would help the poor, public education, and so on. But the political regime there wouldn't tolerate it. And you have to remember that Obama and Hillary Clinton at the time endorsed the coup. He was thrown out, basically, illegally. He was not voted out. So it creates this vacuum where you have this, basically what I consider to be a dictatorship government, now repressing some of these people who are pressing for reform. And so these people are being repressed, and they're being violently murdered in many ways and intimidated. And so they're coming down here for help, relief. So when you ask the question, do we have a responsibility? Well, if we intervene in their political affairs and help overthrow some of their duly elected leaders, yes, we do. And the question is now is not whether the question is now, to me, is whether or not they're political refugees or not. And of course, we have a vetting process here in America where they get processed by the Border Patrol, and then they determine, we have a court system where we determine whether or not these people are legitimately political refugees or not. So
yes, I understand that President Trump just stated something like they're not going to be able to come into the country to determine whether or not they're political refugees. So I don't know how that is supposed to work, but that's his latest argument.
Well, President Trump is flouting the law. Okay, that's all I can say. Because that's not the law. I mean, and he is, that's all he's doing. And he's just basically ramping up his right-wing base, basically to create fear in the American public, to basically distract the public from the real issues. And the real issues are people need medical health care. They need cheaper, higher college tuition. We need an infrastructure. We need better jobs.
Well, we had somebody who we thought was going to bring us hope and change, President Obama, who came up with Obamacare. So why do we still have healthcare issues?
Well, because you have about 30 million people who don't qualify for healthcare, and there's no price controls on the healthcare system now. As you will know, prices keep creeping up. So, but the point here is that President Trump, unfortunately, is using propaganda. And I think that sending the troops, 15,000 troops down there, I mean, it's just it's like trying to kill a gnat, with a big hammer. I mean, it's just totally way out of line. I don't think that it's necessary. I think that we have the most militarized border than ever before. And we have high tech, already. We have a security surveillance system down there. These people, there's no evidence that these people are armed or present a danger. And there's no evidence that for President Trump's statement that these people are terrorists or that there's Muslims involved. They're just totally, there's no factual basis for it. And he should be pressed for that. And every time he is pressed, he gets angry and he calls everybody fake media.
Aren't we getting contradictory stories though about this caravan? We're getting, like, I heard that there was some, I can't remember the name of an organization, that they were behind it. I heard Venezuela was funding it, and I know that this is definitely the largest caravan that we've seen, correct?
Yeah, well, that's all hearsay. Where's the evidence on it? That's what I want to know. And there's a point. I'm glad you brought up Venezuela, okay? Because here's the deal. Like, okay, most of these people are coming from regimes that we support currently. Now, the regime, the governments that are duly elected, like Venezuela, Bolivia, and none of these refugees are coming from Venezuela. So, the whole notion of trying to blame Venezuela for this is some ridiculous conspiracy. That's not it. Look, I'm going to recommend to your viewers Juan Gonzalez, who is co-host of Democracy Now!, wrote a book on this. He basically wrote a book, and there's a documentary on it. I don't know the name of it, but you can look it up on YouTube. And basically, he showed that since the 80s, during the Reagan administration, there's a pattern of waves of migrations after there's been disruption of democracies in Central America. And in most cases, America's intervened on behalf of the more authoritarian repressive governments. Okay, and so these wave of immigrants, these that are really considered political refugees, basically, there's a pattern there. And I recommend your viewers that you see that. And Juan Gonzalez wrote a book on that. And so he shows basically, I think that, so what I'm saying is that
I think that's accepted. Noam Chomsky discusses it. Various interventions in South America and Central America. I think that's accepted knowledge. Now, whether or not, unfortunately, though, isn't it always the citizens that pay for the mistakes of our own government, our own foreign policy? In other words, if in fact there is a big influx of immigrants, how does that impact? I'm not saying that these are violent people or whatever, but they're not necessarily vetted citizens. They haven't been paying taxes, correct?
I understand that, but the issue here is whether these people pose a threat to national security, because that's the way the president has framed it. And he's trying to scare the American public that these people are here to invade America, and that's totally ridiculous. And so that's the real issue, because he's playing political football with this. And what I am saying is that we have laws, immigration laws here, that if they're considered political refugees, then they have a right to apply for it. Now, whether or not they get accepted is another issue. So what I'm saying is that first of all, let's let the process work itself out. All right. And let's find out whether or not these people are legitimate political refugees, or if there's some other reason. But to basically just point out and accuse other countries of being involved in this conspiracy of sorts with no evidence whatsoever, just because the president says it, I think it's just,
Well, I do know
it's just political propaganda.
I do know that I was trying to prepare for the show a little bit, and I'm looking at an interview from this man who supposedly, I don't remember, he's the former director of ICE, and he's stating that this was a problem that was a long time coming because the laws would permit it. So if the laws are permitting it, and he basically agreed that they did permit it, then, and these people could come en masse, which is kind of intimidating, I think, to many citizens. I guess that's where we're at.
We're so intimidated if you present the problem as that. I think that we have sufficient resources on the border to deal with the problem, and we've done it before. And I think that having the military down there doesn't really solve the problem. It only makes it worse.
Well, but it makes.
I don't see how does it solve the problem?
Well, the only thing I thought is, I said, when you have that many people that are massed together, there could be a lot of, almost any small mistake could be a big mistake. That's what I thought. If somebody shot inadvertently, rioting or whatever, and I don't know that, and I don't really know the whole issue regarding, I don't even understand in a way what President Trump is doing, because I have a secretary, her brother works for the Border Patrol. I won't identify her. And she said that as a law exists now, if they are children or it's a family with children, they have to let them come over.
Right.
And Trump is trying to sign some sort of executive order. No, if they're illegal, they can't come over. But so the law is in place, and them sending the military down is, I guess, just to help, as it is now, just going to help organize them as they come over. Because I think most of them do have children with them.
Well, I'm just saying that the rhetoric inflames the situation, is what it does. You even have supposedly the Minutemen down there. They're like this private militia groups that really don't have any legal standing, but there's been some complaints by Border Patrol that these people get in the way and it could be potential violence. And there's property owners down there in Texas that don't really want them there. I'm talking about the Minutemen. They're like a private militia group that, have this, their goal is to try to keep, immigrants out. They call them illegals and so on. And I think, I'm just saying that, okay, that's a political philosophy, but the bottom line that we should follow the law here. That's all I'm saying. And we should follow the law, and we have a law in place. We already have, I believe, a sophisticated immigration border police presence there that'll process these people. I don't see any evidence that these people are here to create any problem. Look, they're moms and kids and old men and so on. And my own observation of this is that President Trump, you have to see he has a pattern here, and I call him the fake fear president, because he's like Chicken Little. He's creating all these fear moments that aren't really based on any legitimate basis. Okay. And so he did that with the immigrants when he first took office, that all Mexicans are coming in here and they're rapists and drug lords and whatnot and so on. And then he did the ban on the Muslims, it assumes that all Muslims are terrorists. So, I mean, this is all just fear mongering. And I'm just saying that, look, let me tell you what's going to happen. More than likely, when this thing's going to die down and he's going to forget about it, he's going to move something on. It's these tariff wars against the Chinese, against the Russians, against the Iranians.
Okay. And he's condemned for being too friendly.
What I'm saying is that he has one policy, and it's all fear. It's all negative.
Okay.
It's all fear based, and I'm saying that it's unfortunate that a lot of Americans. And when he didn't he in fact help to kind of defray the problems with Korea though, and with Russia? Well, that deal's not done yet though.
But he's trying. Yeah, but he's and Tammy Langino, by the way, yes, they have the right they have not broke a law. They have the right to apply for asylum. Correct. So she's in fundamental agreement with you. Yes. On that issue, and so. The other thing that I noticed, and I got to say, I practice in federal court. You get over there? You practice in federal court? It's been a while. Okay, well, actually. So nobody says this for whatever reason. The first time an illegal here, I've seen it in court many times. The first time an illegal comes to court, they caught him. He's basically time served until he goes to court, right? Okay. Did you know that? That's their procedure. I've heard it in court, and that's their procedure. The second time, they get 30 days in jail, and then they're sent back. So I'm thinking to myself, well, I don't know. If you want to solve this problem, if it is a problem of too many illegals coming into the United States, if you want to solve this problem, you won't be giving them time served. You won't be giving them 30 days. There'll be more of a punitive penalty. There'll be more of a, something more severe than that. I never hear that discussed. I'm not saying that I'm in favor of it, but if you believe that it's a problem and you want to solve the problem, it would seem to me that the people are, in fact, in a way, being encouraged to come, because if they come over enough, eventually there will be some sort of amnesty program, because we've had a series of them since Ronald Reagan. And that's another thing that is now being acknowledged. I actually did the amnesty program under Reagan. He had a huge amnesty program. Right. It was the first one. And Bush Jr. was basically favored, I think, illegals, and he said he publicly stated they did work that United States citizens didn't want to do.
Right. Well, I mean, look, that's a complicated question, and I'm not saying that we don't need immigration reform, but I don't think that we should use immigrants as political football to create fear in Americans, to distract from the real issues being jobs, education, healthcare, minimum wage, higher minimum wage. And so those are the real issues that these Republicans don't want to talk about.
Well, let's talk about jobs.
One more point on this, to follow up on this. And I don't remember these Republicans, other than just they want to tell you what to be afraid of. I don't remember them talking about anything what they're going to do. I didn't hear one of these guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, talking about how great these tax breaks are going to be for Americans, how they're going to create more jobs.
Well, I wasn't in favor.
These tax breaks are going to cost the middle class more
right.
taxes next year, and you will wait. And these tariff war that Trump is so proud of, because it's yes, it's us against them, right? It's against the Chinese and the Russians and the Iranians. We just wait till Christmas when Walmart prices go up. And that's going to be when you realize that basically these tariffs are not necessarily a good thing. Look,
you're changing the subjects a little bit.
Well, no,
talking
because
about unemployment, the tariff wars.
Yes, but what I'm saying is what they have in common is basically they're fear-based. Everything that Trump has done mostly is fear-based. And I agree with you that North Korea was a good thing. I think
Russia is a good thing. Well, I disagree with the liberals on there.
Yeah, but how does withdrawing from the nuclear treaty make us safer? How does withdrawing from the Iranian nuclear treaty make us safer? How does withdrawn from the Paris Accords on climate change better? I mean, that's another problem. I mean, people don't talk about this. He's withdrawing from all these treaties and isolating America. And right now, what you have is what these tariff wars are doing is basically a lot of countries that are trying to de-dollarize from the economy. And that's not good for America, because right now the dollar is the reserve currency. And you already have, Europe is tied in with an Iranian deal. So you already have them, you have Japan, you have China, you have Iran, you have Russia. They're all, even Venezuela and many other countries are trying to find other currencies to trade their goods, right? And so, it's not a big thing now, but if Trump continues to alienate other countries and it's his way or the highway policy, then this is going to continue, and it's going to create more instability in our economy.
Okay, well, you mentioned the unemployment, which you said unemployment's a problem, but according to statistics, unemployment's lower than it's been in many, many years. Are you saying that statistic a lie?
Well, okay, yeah, but you have to understand how they measure employment. Now, they haven't changed how they measure. Well, yeah, well, okay, let me tell you. Okay, you can be working 8 hours a day or part-time, and that's considered employment. And if you have stopped looking for employment, you're no longer counted as looking for employment. So the question is, we don't even know how many people, and there's millions of them, who no longer look for work. Another thing too, okay, so let's not, it's a good thing if we have more jobs. So I'm not saying
but Trump didn't invent that way to figure up the unemployment rate.
I know, but
on those, whatever those objective criteria they are, it's allegedly much lower. I could believe it. I don't have any reason to dispute it.
I think it's a flash in the pan. He's trying to bolster that he's done something. And the thing, but let me just finish on this, because ultimately, what we talked about earlier, the deeper crisis is, and I don't want to totally blame Trump on this. It started with Clinton, right? Service-oriented jobs and so on. We have deindustrialized the country, and all these global trade agreements have basically outsourced a lot of jobs.
That's been going on since the 70s.
So we got automation and so on, what's called the gig economy and so on. You got Uber cars now that are being driven by robots, and so these are all threats to any kind of long-term career in our country. What I'm saying is that, like,
but isn't Trump the first president too that said he wants to bring production back? He's the first one that I know that campaigned on that.
Well, yeah, he promised a lot of things. But what I'm trying to say is, getting back to this employment thing, because it can be the story. It can be, yes, but I'm saying, how long is it going to last? and what kind of quality jobs do we have here? And I'm just saying that it distorts the serious problem in America. I mean, people are going through a hard time, and to make it seem that everything's okay now, we've created some jobs. How long is that going to last? And not only that, I believe
you could say that about anything. Though.
Well,
How long
I understand that, but let's get realistic here.
Obamacare was a failure, I think, from day one.
Well, okay. Yeah, I think you're partly right, but it's not totally a failure because at least it covered
pre-existing conditions.
At least covered pre-existing, which
I actually had a couple of clients that said they couldn't get health care until 2 or 3 clients couldn't get any. Now they could get it, and these seem like pretty honest working class people.
Oh, that was
so that was good.
Okay, let me just say that was better than before. Okay, I agree with you. It's got problems.
A lot of problems.
There's no cap on prices because prices keep going up.
They're very high.
I mean, I am frankly for Medicare for all system. All right. So, I mean, let's get down to it. And my criticism of Obama, and I'm critical of him too now, this is not to me a bipartisan issue. This concerns all Americans. And my concern with Obama was that basically he never seriously entertained the single payer issue. Okay. There was 3 plans. The Obama plan, right? And then there was the public one with the public option, and then there was single payer, which is Medicare for everybody. And there's a lot of people from the progressive left, where I come from, that basically wanted a single payer Medicare for everybody. Well, that was never even debated in Congress. Obama never talked about it. He talked about the public option, but but even then, he didn't push it. So yes. Let me finish the point here on Obama because I'm critical of him too. He didn't go far enough. Could he done better? Yes, I agree.
Well, that plan, Senator Dole was in favor of that plan, and that plan was a Republican, and Romney had it basically in Massachusetts.
I agree. It's a Romney.
So that was a Republican plan.
I agree.
Then at some point, why they changed their minds on that plan that they didn't want it, I don't know. Maybe because it was partisanship and because Barack Obama was in favor of it. But that was a right-wing plan to me.
I don't disagree. And I think, and this is where I think Obama didn't go far enough. He had a majority Congress the first couple of years.
That was for the insurance. That was an insurance company plan.
Well, I agree. And that's just why I agree with it. It wasn't.
And its constitutionality was very questionable.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's got.
Well, I do. That's what I thought.
Well, but the Supreme Court ruled on that. And so it was constitutional.
By one vote.
It was a right-wing court too, right?
That's a point.
Okay, but my point is that yes, I agree with you on that. It could have gone. He could have done better, but it was better than we had before. So let's be fair here. Okay,
I don't think it was. I think it was in some respects, and Judy Jennings says that if someone has to have 2 or more jobs to survive, it makes the unemployment numbers look like they have improved. A lot of people do have to have 2 or more jobs to survive.
Yes, but that's the point I was trying to make, is that people's standard of living aren't any higher. You can talk about jobs and the market is up and whatnot, but the standard of American living is going down.
But we have 7,000 people coming in from a caravan. We have 5,000 to 7,000 people coming in from a caravan that want to come here.
Well, I mean,
so I don't know. And they say they're coming to work.
Well, okay, but that's another problem, all right? But we have a lot of problems. Then part of it is that a lot of people are getting displaced because of these wars, right? I mean, a lot of these countries in America, in Central America, are involved in civil wars and stuff, and there's politically repressive regimes which we are supporting, and so these people are flying for some kind of relief, right? So now, whether or not you say, how's that help America, whatever. Well, all I can say is that if you don't want political refugees knocking at our door, then we need to quit intervening in their political affairs. Okay, now we complain about Mexico. Why are these people coming over here? And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. NAFTA, and this is not on Trump, right? This is on Clinton, right? He passed NAFTA with Republican Congress support. Now, basically, what happened with NAFTA is that it displaced a lot of small farmers in Mexico because basically agriculture, corn especially, is subsidized in America, and it's all corporate industrialized farming. So they're flooding the market over there with cheap corn, and a lot of these Mexican farmers got displaced, right? And so they go to the maquiladora factories, which aren't that many, and people are getting underpaid anyways. So they fly north. So I'm just saying that these global trade agreements that we make, which we benefit from, at least the investors benefit from. I'm not sure that the workers that worked in the factories in West America benefited, because a lot of them lost their jobs, right? Because of the deindustrialization. But so you had a lot of these people coming for jobs because they can no longer sustain themselves. So what I'm saying is, we live in a global economy, and some of these global trade agreements that benefit Wall Street and the investor class do have an impact on people's lives in third world countries who are a lot worse off than we are. And then when they come into this country, what we need to do, what I say to most of these viewers is, you need to read more on the issues. Don't take my word for it. Just read up on it, and you'll see that in this global economy, these global trade agreements are displacing a lot of people, and they're lowering the standard of America through outsourcing. And I'm not blaming this on Trump. I'm not blaming Trump.
He's not a favor. He doesn't seem in favor of most of these global trade agreements.
Well, yes, I know, but what I'm trying to say,
he was not in favor of NAFTA.
Well, I understand. I'm not blaming Trump for everything on this. Okay, but what I'm saying is that when you say that he's going to turn the ship around and make America great again or whatever, I think we have a long way to go. I frankly think that we need I think what Bernie talked about, we need a revolution, a social democratic revolution. We need a paradigm shift in this country. Okay. And what I'm talking about, what I mean by that is that ever since the 1980s, you had Ronald Reagan talking about attacking big government. It's what you call the neoliberal movement. Well, what that means is that, in other words, the market solves all our problems. We don't need the government intervening in our lives, except for the military and the police. That basically is a right-wing position. And it comes from the Milton Friedman school. Basically, in other words, let's just deregulate and privatize everything. Well, we have done that for 40 years, and look where we're at now. We're in dire straits right now. And I'm saying, so there has to be, and I'm critical of the corporate Democrats as well, because they come from the Clinton school, who basically are in this incrementalism and no longer represent the working class, and are more concerned with modest changes, compromising with the Republicans, and nothing's getting done. And I think that here, and another thing we haven't talked about, this is climate change. It's a big deal.
Well, let's stop for a second and not go to climate change. So you're basically saying that you have disappointments of the Democratic Party as well as the Republicans.
Yes, of course.
And you're implying that they're corporatists as well. And that
I'm not implying, I'm stating it.
Yeah, and that they in fact have a
not all of them now. I'm talking about the leadership.
Okay. Yes, and that would seem to be the case, because they, as you say, they were behind NAFTA, right?
And the Republicans too now.
Right, and it doesn't seem like when the Democrats had under President Obama, when they had basic control, they didn't seem like they wanted to raise minimum wage, etc.
I agree.
So there's an issue regarding the abandonment of the Democrats for the working class families and for the working class people. Is that a correct criticism?
I think both parties, but I'm just saying that the Democrats have always said that they're for the working class people. All right. I mean, basically, it's what they say they are. And I'm not. And there are some progressive Democrats like Bernie Sanders that are, but I'm saying that a lot of them, like Pelosi and Schumer, and they're basically are I believe, too beholden to the donor class, the big money that floods their campaigns, and enables them to stay in office. And this is why I think when Bernie, one of the good things that Bernie did, he laid a template down. He says, I'm not taking any corporate PAC money, because that way I am going to be only accountable to the American people, which are small donors. And I think Beto O'Rourke did the same thing, and other people following suit have done something. And I really think that's the new template for progressive Democrats to do, to follow.
They both lost, though.
Because it doesn't matter. But
Bernie lost, and Mr.
Well, I agree. Well, I think he got cheated by the DNC anyways. And
well, she's a great liberal. Yeah,
Donna Brazile wrote a book on that, and how basically a lot of my corporate Democrat buddies, they get angry with me on this. They disagree with me on this. And I've had my vehement arguments with them, because they think that Hillary would have solved all our problems. Maybe so. Maybe she probably wouldn't have been as bad as Trump. But the reality is that she's a corporatist, and I don't think she would have done a lot.
Her platform regarding militarism in such countries as Libya was not good for many of us.
I agree with that.
And it's strong disagreement.
I don't agree with it. I mean, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah.
But my point is this: is that what I'm trying to appeal to your viewers is that it's really the issues are so deep that somehow people on moderate right and people on the left need to get together, because there are certain common issues. We have to cut across the identity politics, cut across the cultural civil war that we're going through, and we have to look through the common issues that we have. And I'm talking about healthcare is number one. 83% poll shows that across the board, Republican states and Democratic states, people want Medicare. But are the Republicans leadership or the Democratic leadership? I'm talking about in particular Pelosi talking about it? No, they don't talk about it. It's the progressives like Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders that are talking about this. Beto O'Rourke. That's why he got so much traction. Because if you want people to turn out to vote, you have to turn them on. And they have to have something to vote for instead of all this negative politics.
Well, and instead of propagandizing people, I call them the vote Nazis. Vote, vote, vote. Well, there's a reason people aren't voting. If they had better, if we had better candidates and we had better parties, perhaps, or more than two parties, maybe that we wouldn't have to propagandize people to go out and vote. Maybe they'd be more enthusiastic.
Well, I think it's got to do with the issues. If you give somebody look, I'm an issue-oriented person. It could be a Republican, but if you have a Republican saying, I want Medicare for all, and you have a Democrat saying, well, I want improve Obamacare, I will vote for the Republican. Okay, so it's all about issues. And the problem is that I don't think that either the Democrats or the Republicans, well, and I'm giving you what I agree. I agree with Ralph Nader and Noam Chomsky and people like that. So I'm coming from their point of view, but I think Nader's right about this, all right? More people should read Ralph Nader and Noam Chomsky and people like that to get a better information, better than me, right? But basically what we're saying is that
Noam was on the show,
That's great. That's great.
It was great.
That
was great.
There's a couple people I want to recommend that you should have on your show that I think are important.
Thank you.
But what I'm saying is very good, very good. You have more people like that. But anyways,
that's not easy to have Noam Chomsky and Cindy Sheehan was on the show too.
Okay.
Via so that was nice some years ago.
Try to get Michael Parenti and Max Bloom. Well, you might be able to.
Yeah, we'll try. You may help us. You can help us on that.
I'll try. Whatever I can do. but all I'm trying to say is that look, that these issues cut across both parties, and that both parties, what Nader calls the duopoly, are basically dragging their feet and serving the interest of the donor class. Okay, and I'm talking about the military-industrial complex. I'm talking about big pharma. I'm talking about Silicon Valley. I'm talking about big oil. All right, those people basically run and control our two parties, and they basically call indirectly. They're the shadow government that run our policies, and this is who people. Both parties, I'm talking about the leadership here, are basically serving.
It's not the party's fault when the United States Supreme Court comes in a case like Citizens United and says that unlimited campaign contributions from corporations, right? So it's not the party's fault necessarily. And more recently, a case which I've talked about several times, I forget the name, where that governor of Virginia took various, you could call it payola, a Rolex watch, a trip, etc. And the Supreme Court said, well, traditionally, people are allowed ingratiation and access to our politicians. Therefore, these gifts were not payola. That's not a commonly known case, but that was, I think, as big in many respects as Citizens United. So we have a hard time in trying to keep our parties in line when that's the naked truth.
I agree. I'll respond to that. The problem is too much big money, and that Democrats have to earn big money against the Republicans and Republicans vice versa before they feel that they can compete. Okay, so what I'm saying is that we have to have campaign finance reform. All right, at least try for that. That's another issue we have to work on, because this whole notion that you cannot rationalize.
President McCain, Mr. McCain, Senator McCain was. He tried that. He did.
Yes, and him and Senator Feinstein, if I'm not correct.
That's correct.
Wisconsin
McCain,
did that.
Feinstein bill. That's right.
Yes, Feingold, right. Well, yeah, but we have to do that. I'm just saying that, if those are issues, and I'm talking, these are big issues. These are big issues that affect our democracy. That way we cannot get, enough information in the news. We hear what? The corporate media, what do we hear? We hear the Democrats versus the Republicans, as if those are the only two opinions. It's a very narrow spectrum. You don't get other voices. You know, I rarely hear Noam Chomsky or Ralph Nader on there who have a different opinion, have a much more critical approach of both parties. You never get him on there because the spectrum of opinion in this country is so narrow because of the donor class, because, you know, basically the news media now is all about ratings, about making money. I'll give you an example. We talked about
and I will say something very quickly. The fairness doctrine was gotten rid of.
Correct.
During the Reagan administration.
Correct.
Very detrimental. Even someone locally running for mayor, whatever, the paper is free to basically say whatever they want, and you're not given the right to respond. So the fairness doctrine was not perfect. It was a very complicated doctrine.
But it was better. I agree with that.
But it was a much better situation,
I agree with that.
especially when you have such large capital that control the media. But look, we're here now.
Well, I know
the average person now does have access to media, whatever it is, Twitter or Facebook or YouTube or which, you know, right? So that, but maybe we're not utilizing it. Maybe we're not keeping up our role.
It's a slow process now because, you know, these corporate media's giants are monolithic, right? And they've shaped and manufactured consent, as Chomsky would say, to many viewers, right? So we are making inroads, and this is one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders and some of these progressive Democrats, and maybe people on the right, but I'm a progressive, right? So I'm pushing this point of view. Make no mistake about it. They're raising money through the internet, and they're actually the social media now, I believe, is providing more useful information and more accurate information than the corporate media. The corporate media, to me, is just kind of passive. You know, they're basically what's called coverage. They're covering these political events like a sports event. There's the Democrats and then there's the Republicans. There's very little investigative journalism. There's very little fact checking, which they could do to question and challenge these guys.
I think that's been going on for a while. Remember the song by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young? People carrying signs mostly say "Hooray for our side." So that was kind of an apt social criticism I thought of the '60s, and it's still kind of it's gotten worse. I would agree.
Okay,
it's gotten worse.
Okay, remember the press is what was considered the fourth branch of government, right? The fourth estate, because the press is.
That's an argument. That's what they say.
Well, but it's the only other institution that's mentioned in the Constitution, First Amendment, freedom of the press,
an issue.
And if my history is right, when I read the Federalist Papers and Thomas Jefferson and so on, their arguments for why we need independent press is a bulwark to protect us against a tyrannical government. Okay, but what has happened now is that you have corporations basically have taken over, to a large extent, the media, and basically they're working in the interest of government, and basically they're concerned more with profits than they are news. And so basically what you have now is the press, and I'm talking about the corporate press, is not vigilant enough.
I will tell you something.
They're more concerned with making money. And they don't want to basically.
Let me interrupt you, though. There's a point I made before. If you read the book 1984, which was written in 1948, George Orwell basically states the same thing. He basically states that how could we, you know, report things about wars and then people forget them. And many people think that was a futuristic novel, but it really wasn't. It was social criticism of the way things were. Then I think even Mr. Smith Goes to Washington talks about that. So I'm not disagreeing with anything you're saying, but I'm saying that I think historically this has been a problem, you know, that the media is not necessarily objective. And you could look at the buildups even within our lifetimes. Look at the buildup to the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. You know, of course, that was
weapons of mass destruction, right? Which is all basically false.
Right.
But here's the deal. The corporate media, and I'm talking about all the networks, from MSNBC on to Fox, all push that narrative. And I was watching Democracy Now! And other shows, basically that had independent sources that were saying that there was nothing there. And I never supported the war because there was other sources, CIA sources too, that were saying that basically that there was no weapons of mass destruction.
That was covered in Newsweek. That was covered in Newsweek too.
I know, but what I'm saying is that during the time of the war, you had very little. Pat Donahue, who was an MSNBC, you had people who, like Ralph Nader and people like that, who were challenging this war narrative. He got fired from MSNBC because he wouldn't toe the line. So,
Right. Well,
I'm going to tie this to your point, though, because ultimately what we're talking about, what Orwell was talking about, is propaganda, and that the media has become propagandistic. They have a line they're pushing, okay, and so they're not acting as an objective, vigilant press that's keeping a check on the government. And sometimes they do, all right, but rarely they don't.
I will say this. I think what you're saying, most of the people I speak to, common people like yourself, small businessmen, they're in agreement on the right and the left that you don't get much news.
Yeah, I mean, they have common concerns, and I'm saying that they get distorted by the propaganda of Fox News or MSNBC and so on. And so what we have is a division of what I call the cultural wars, right? You have the far right and you have the far left. And you have this smearing campaign, and there's very little information is being given, and I just don't think that the corporate media is doing enough service to the American viewer. Because the whole point here, let me just tie this up. The point of the press in news is to inform the public, not take a side. Right, but they're not really doing that. I'm not saying they don't do it on some occasions, but more and more they're propagandistic. They have narratives and they have interests they're pushing. Okay, like weapons of mass destruction. All right, and that was a narrative that they were pushing, and there was very little other sources outside, the Bush administration and their experts and so many of these military experts and so on, who basically were pushing the narrative, right? And so we got war we didn't want, all right? So, and I'm saying that that's common. And today, okay, do most Americans who watch the corporate media realize that Israel has murdered 220 Palestinians, nonviolent protesters, and then wounded 1,000 who haven't even crossed Israel? How many people know that? How many people know that Saudi Arabia is basically destroying Yemen? And there's been over 100,000 people murdered by Saudi Arabia, and then we're supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia. They just found a recent bomb that bombed a bus with a bunch of kids. It was made out of Raytheon, one of our weapon manufacturers. What I'm saying is that how come we don't hear about this? How come we Americans, and I think Americans, like any other people, don't want to see this? Well, I'm pushing the point here that the media is not necessarily objective. They have an agenda. And I'm just saying, why don't we hear about these things? Nobody knows about it.
Allegedly, I think it started with Fox News, and people realize that they have the media realize that people have a tendency to watch the media they agree with. So now you got CNN. They push their agenda to get their viewers, and Fox, etc. I would say
yes, but there's a uniformity here. I mean, there's a sensing point. The weapons of mass destruction narrative was in all networks. I don't see. I'm talking about the corporate networks, all right? I'm not talking about social media. Okay. The murdering of these Palestinians. 200 of them who are violent non-protesters. I don't hear this on any of the corporate.
I'm not aware of that issue, so I'm not going to disagree with you.
That's my point.
And I'm like everyone else. I have to work for a living, take care of your property, whatever.
Well, I understand that, but I'm saying that, and you know this. So what I'm saying is they're shaping a certain point of view and pushing certain narratives and not giving us the whole picture, the whole context. Well, so how we as citizens, how can we make a decision about our political leaders? Well, we're not getting all of the information, or at least a more.
And I'm sure that one could make the same arguments, and I'm sure that people in favor of Israel could say that, hey, look, we're not getting this out, and this isn't understood as well. Is that right?
I disagree. No, I don't agree with that, because America gives them $4 billion in aid, and I'm not anti-Israel, but what I am saying is that, look, I mean,
that's our military. That's a military base.
I know, but they're committing atrocities over there. All right, and we're not covering it. Our corporate media doesn't cover it. Saudi Arabia is committing atrocities in Yemen, and we're not covering that. Because why? Because Israel's our ally, and Saudi Arabia, we like their petrodollars. They serve our interests, the interests of some big investors and big companies in this country. So what I'm saying is, so the corporate media does have an agenda. It's just invisible because we don't see the other side.
I don't.
So what I'm saying is that I believe they're part of the problem, and this is why social media is taking off, and you have a lot more social media sites, and this is why you do have.
And I know, and
a progressive movement that hopefully will catch.
And they don't like it. They don't like it either. I know the Corpus Christi Caller Times, through implication and innuendo, they're very displeased with Facebook. They're very displeased that it gives people a voice. That they're very displeased by that. Some of this corporate media, and they're corporate media too. They try to pretend they're not, but they're all these independent, these small newspapers in every town. It seems like they're dancing to the same.
Well, they're owned by bigger.
I wanted to say something very simple. A lot of it is the media will report maybe everything, but what they want to report, they just use repetition. So you'll hear that every day for years or whatever, for months. They're very good at repetition, in what they want to get through.
And that's propaganda.
So even the New York Times, say one of the alleged Noam Chomsky dislikes the Times for various reasons, but they'll put in maybe the story that you referred to about Yemen in the back.
I agree.
One time,
yes.
But the agenda that they want to push, they'll repeat.
Exactly.
I agree. Markedly. Yes. So even maybe the better news sources are very astute at keeping information away from the masses of people.
Well, right. No, I agree with that. But I'm saying that they do that so then they can say, well, we cover everything.
That's right.
But what does that mean? I mean, it's like, so what I'm saying is that the corporate media does not serve the public interest of the ordinary American. Because I don't think that our perception of the world is shaped by media. Let's face it.
We don't know. I don't
know. Chomsky's written I don't know how many books, and another one is Michael Parenti wrote a book too on the engineering of the media. Right. So
let's talk about issues other than the media, though. And we talked briefly about the two. Well, I wanted to say something about you keep referring to. Bernie Sanders, a socialist, and this and that. I hear Bernie Sanders,
social democracy.
So he sounds like a Humphrey Democrat when I was a kid. He sounds like Humphrey had the same, and he was a mainline Democrat.
Right.
So I don't understand why Bernie Sanders and some of these other Democrats are endorsing using this word socialism, social progressive, and all this other stuff. When I was growing up, these were McGovern, Humphrey, Muskie. Those were mainline Democratic positions.
Well, I think that the reason why they're using that word is because during the Cold War with Russia, socialism was a dirty word, and basically the media and some of these, especially these right-wing pundits, basically always kind to fudge socialism with communism. And communism is the extreme form of socialism. It's totally state controlled. There's no private ownership. Now, when we talk about democratic socialism, what we're talking about is, you have it in Europe. You had what Franklin Roosevelt did in World War after the Great Depression. The New Deal, Federal Jobs Program. You had Medicare, and so on. The GI Bill, all those, the post office, those are all forms of socialism. But the reason why people disconnect, especially the older people, not the younger ones, is because we've been so propagandized to think that socialism is communism, and it's not. There are many degrees of it, right? All socialism is basically in its purest form, and the radical form is communism, all right? But what Franklin Roosevelt, the New Dealers basically, did was basically made the point that government has a role. If private industry cannot provide jobs and a meaningful standard of life for the average American, then it's up to the government to do it. Okay, and so it doesn't mean that we're outlawing private investment, private companies, but the government's going to have a more than just a military responsibility, has a civil responsibility towards the public. This is why you got Medicare, and you got Social Security and so on, which are successful programs, by the way, the post office and so on. Of course, people, the libertarian class and the right-wing class and the corporate class, they want to destroy the whole notion of a socialist form of government because they want to privatize all the services for profit.
Yeah, some of it doesn't make any sense either. The corporations are a product of our laws. They're protected by our laws. They exist as because we passed the laws allowing corporate entities, right?
I agree.
And the tax system is a part of that,
right.
and how they're taxed. So for them to say, well, we're for free enterprise, well, look, buddy, it doesn't say anything about corporations in the United States Constitution.
I agree.
And that's an artificial entity, and you don't have to have it, and you're benefiting by that. So some of the that's why in some respects the Libertarian Party is a little more interesting because they're more consistent, I think, politically.
Well, I agree with some things in the Libertarian Party, and I believe that they believe that we shouldn't be intervening in wars and so on. So I think that they're right about that. Their foreign policy, I agree with them. I don't totally agree with their domestic policy because I just don't think there's such a thing as a free market anymore. I mean, the banks got bailed out by the government, by taxpayers, and that's a major socialistic subsidy there. Okay, and this is what Jill Stein's point was, she's running for Green Party, right? Basically, people say, well, where are you going to get the money, for free college education and all this stuff? Where are we going to come with all this money? Well, her argument was, look, the government subsidized the banks from a meltdown from their own speculations and casino gambling, which destroyed the lives of many people. They lost their homes and everything, and they got bailed out, and they never went to jail. They're not being held accountable. So, why don't we invest in America? Why don't we invest in Americans? Why don't we invest in higher education and take the burden off the future of this country, which is the educated class, right? So when people don't understand, like, well, where are we going to get the money? Well, the bottom line is that, and the reason why they ask those questions, the disconnect is that for so long we believe that the free market solves all our problems, and we've made a pejorative out of socialism, that the government has no role whatsoever, so that people don't understand this. The bottom line is that when we were in a crisis, the Great Depression in 1929, had to resort towards the New Deal, which really was what you were saying earlier, basically a social democratic reform. And all it is basically, for all of you, bear with me a little bit, there's three basic.
We only have about 6 minutes left, 7 minutes left.
There's three economic schools, and there are many more, right? And there's the free market school, Milton Friedman, basically no regulation, markets will create jobs and they balance each other in competition and so on. Then there's the Marxist school, right? Which basically says central planning and government controls everything, right? And there's no free competition or anything. That's the far extreme to the left. And then there's Keynesian economics, basically, which is what FDR practice and Bernie Sanders and people like that, and myself espouse. Basically, the government should allow deficit spending to create jobs and create the infrastructure, to create public schools, public services, and so on. And that means that the people at the top are going to have to pay more taxes to pay for it, to help us pay for it. In the New Deal, the corporate capital gains taxes was taxed at 90%. What it is now with the Bush tax cut, 20%. And are these people really investing in America? Are they building new factories and jobs? No, they're not. What are they doing with this money? Basically, with all this money, free money they're getting from the Federal Reserve, in other words, low interest money, not just the 750 billion, but the trillions they're giving now to keep them afloat. What are they doing with the money? Are they building new schools and bridges? No. What are they doing? A lot of their money is basically they're buying back their stock to this money, this free money they're getting, and they're pumping up the value of the stock, and then they get these huge bonus fees at the top. So they're getting richer and richer at our expense. And it's the American taxpayer who's paying for these guys, right? And so if you talk about why is America going down the tubes? Why is there no job? Why is the infrastructure crumbling? Why are Americans, basically struggling to make ends meet? Why are they working 3-4 jobs? Why can't they educate their kids? Why can't they afford healthcare? Why can't they afford higher education? Well, when you start giving most of the taxpayers' base, to a oligarchic class, a corporate class, well, this is what happens. It's called class warfare, and we're involved in one now. And all I'm saying is that to all my brothers across the board, and I'm talking about, we need to cut across the identity politics, and people have to realize that the moderate Republicans on the right to the progressive leftists on the left, and people in the middle class working people, you know, there are some issues that would benefit us. Healthcare, Medicare for all, and free college education or lower education, easier access to cheaper student loans, and so on. But look, here's the thing. This is for the future, all right? And you started this by saying, well, we're in a crisis. Sort of, that was the gist of it. Well, I'm trying to point out what the crisis is. And we have to do something about climate change. If we don't, you know, we're toast. Right now we have another fire in California. We're getting these huge extreme weather events. These Category 5 hurricanes are hitting us every year, totally devastating the coast. And all Trump can say is, you know, it's a Chinese hoax. I mean, you know, is that leadership? Are you kidding me? You know, there's a consensus among climate scientists that, you know, climate change is real, and even the Pentagon believes it. Okay, and the Republican Party is the only party in the world that denies climate change because they're beholden to the oil companies who want to continue to drill and make more money and so on. So what I'm saying is these are serious problems that we're facing, and if we don't solve them soon, you know, we're heading for a major disaster here, and it's already happening. All right, so you know, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be pessimistic here, but there's a sense of urgency here.
Well, okay, so you talked about you mentioned unemployment several times, and then we went over the fact that allegedly the unemployment is relatively low, and I would say to you that I think
you said that.
I think that this you said on the objective criteria. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, that's what they're saying.
Yeah,
I'm saying that doesn't mean much.
I know, but then again, Trump, he's not the one that invented the way to figure it out. So, but I kind of, you know, when you've repeated the same issues throughout the, and we're reaching the end. But, you know, I think that student loans are a bigger problem, perhaps, than unemployment. I think the burden put on the kids is awful.
I agree.
Very serious problem. I think that they're taken advantage of. I think that ever since the student loan programs have come out, that they've raised the price of tuition because they figure you could borrow the money. Schools have acted unconscionably. I think homelessness is a real problem, not being addressed by anyone. I would watch the Democratic debate. I'd watch the Republican debates. I didn't hear anybody say, what are we going to do about homelessness? Now I understand there's a consensus. They don't want to discuss, they don't want to call them homeless. And obviously it's a multifaceted problem caused by the economy, caused by drugs, caused by mental problems. And sometimes it could be a choice as well. But so that's a major problem. And the student loans are major problems. And I think those could probably be solved. I don't see anybody on the right or the left opposing anything.
I think there has to be tectonic change in our political thinking. It's a battle of ideas right now. And we have to get away from this free market model that the market does everything. I'm not saying do away with it totally. What I am saying is the government has to step in, have a bigger role. We have to start taxing these huge entities to pay their fair share. And government has to basically put people back to work and has to build the infrastructure. And if we don't do it, then we've had this Reaganomics for 40 years, okay? And so people keep saying, well, you know, you keep tax breaks for the rich, trickles down, create jobs. Well, you know, the thing about it is that in these trade agreements, you know, these are what Chomsky calls investor protection agreements. They invest in investor class. They don't do anything for the working class globally. So what I'm saying is that, you know,
I'm looking at the monitor here.
We have to start.
You got about a minute left.
We have to start thinking that more that in the common good, that like we did during the Franklin Roosevelt years. We need to start thinking that we have to take care of the citizens, and the government has a role to play, not just in the military, but civilly. And if we start thinking that way, then maybe we can turn it around and save America from the impending disaster.
All right, this has been Mr. Carlos Morin. Mr. Morin is an attorney practicing in Kingsville, Texas, and nice enough to come on. And anybody disagrees with anything, anybody has a guest, whoever it is, whether it's the Democratic, whether it's the Republican local, or whoever wants to come on, more than pleased to have them on. Thank you very much for watching.
I took a freight train to be my friend.